What's up, everybody? This is Marmovex Forever, and welcome to another episode of Let's Make a PID Loop. So, hooray! In the previous few episodes, we just formally finished up all these stuff about the integral, which is used for precise adjustments. Basically, that's what you guys want to see. You want things to be precise and consistent, and here you go. The integral makes everything precise and consistent on a microscopic level, while your proportion will nicely slow down and reduce the momentum of the robot as the robot approaches the target, and then just basically give things to the integral to handle. We still have one more part, which is the derivative. And this is not the most important part. It's not as important in vex as proportion and integral. Actually, a proportion and integral, a PI controller is just totally capable of a regular precise vex space control and some of the precise movements, but a derivative is still something very nice to add. So what is derivative? If you've taken AP Calc in high school, you'll know that the derivative essentially is the slope of the function, which is exactly the calculus definition of it. The slope of a function given of a graph at a given point is the derivative, and more like an easy way to understand this is the instantaneous rate, which is basically the rate of something. In this case, the rate is our speed, or more technically, velocity. What the derivative is how fast the robot is going, right? And the way we do this, usually when we say speed, it is distance over time. How would we develop an algorithm to calculate the speed or the derivative of your robot's movement, and how would we be able to update this thing every loop? So essentially, what we do is that we measure we measure how much the sensor's values have changed over every single loop's time interval. And in this case, every single loop's time interval is 40 milliseconds. So essentially, we are measuring how much the sensor's values have changed over 40 milliseconds, and we do this for every loop, which is very easy. However, there's one concept I want to stress right now. You have to remember, and this is very important. You have to remember, it messed me up before, and I basically will explain why that's the case later. But remember, the derivative is negative. The derivative is negative. That's a very important concept to stress, and which is not a very formal way to say it, but a more formal way of saying is that in the 95% of the time, when your target is positive, when your proportion and integral, when they are positive, they're positively contributing your motor's power to make it move forward. Your derivative is actually reducing the value of the motor, right? Your derivative is negative in this case, is that it has the opposite sign from proportion and negative. It really should be proportion, something positive, and subtracted the value by adding derivative and then added integral. So derivative is something that hinders the entire movement, and I will explain why. So let's first do the algorithm. Just remember that if the derivative is positive, it doesn't make sense at all. The derivative has to be negative. So let's do the PID. I prefer to put the derivative directly after proportion, but everybody says PID, and the D is in most cases in terms of teamwork, the derivative is pretty important, but is not as important and as contributory as proportion and integral. So let's do this. Let's first make our constants, the variables. So the way you do the derivative is that because you have to measure how much every single time the robot the loop runs, you have to have two variables. One is the official derivative, and the other one is the last position. So the derivative would be calculated from the current position minus the last position, which is basically the error minus your last error. So we already have error, so let's go set up float. Let's go set up the constant as always. Kp kd, this derivative, equals to, I have no idea, I'll just give an estimate of 0.5. And let's go ahead and set up, very importantly, integer last error. We need the last error in order to calculate this. And then we need the integer derivative. Or we can just say that, yes, let's do this. Alright. So, how would we calculate the derivative? And remember, we have to make the thing negative. So imagine that you are, let's say, derivative is equal to. So imagine that your robot is approaching the target, and the target is positive right now. Your proportion and equal positive. Your motor value is positive. Your motor is moving forward, and everything's all right. Your error is positive too. And the error is actually smaller than the yes, the error is always smaller than target. However, in this case, if the robot is doing all these I just said, the error is decreasing every single time I update the loop, because you can imagine, because I'm closing in, the error is decreasing, or the value of the your target subtract your current value, that error is decreasing. So that we want the negative value of derivative, we would basically know that our current error has to be smaller than our last error, because the error decreases as time goes. So if we want a negative derivative, we have to go error minus last error. Did I capitalize that? Make sure I don't make a typo. No, last error. Alright, so how in this case will we know what the last error is? We just calculate last error. Error is equal to last error is equal to error. Alright, so and then one more thing before I start explaining all these junk or mumbo jumbo stuff if you don't understand it in college. And finally, we need the derivatives constant KD to multiply both of the two, so that we get a proper reading of the derivative. Alright, so how does this make sense? And finally, we need to add the derivative to the final power. So first, you basically know that, because you gotta understand that this is the very formal way to calculate derivative, and it's the correct method to do this. Your error is smaller than your last error if you set everything up correctly. So your error minus your last error should be a negative value, and your KD is a positive value, so your derivative in general should be negative. Alright, so how does this method of calculation make sense? First, I just explained that is error minus last error. Basically, you have somehow you get your last error, and then you know that your error right now, which is calculated right here, you know error, so the error minus last error is derivative. So how do we get the last error? So basically, calculation goes like this. Right here in this calculation, directly after we calculate the derivative, we immediately set the error. We immediately set the current error to be our last error, and in this case, this last error, what it means is that in the second loop, the last error in our next calculation. So after I set this last error equals to error, it goes through all of these calculations, take basically no time. It's essentially from here, getting all the way back through here to here, to the derivatives, to the next time I calculate the derivative again, essentially it takes 40 milliseconds. Alright, so we go from 40 milliseconds, we set the last error to error, we go wait 40 milliseconds, boom, we got a new error, we got a new value. So that this error is essentially the last error subtract the distance I traveled in the 40 milliseconds. So that if you keep calculating this, once you find your derivative, you set your current error equals to my last error, and you just keep repeating this. What you get for the derivative in this case is that how much you've traveled on the interval, or how much you've traveled on the distance. Alright? And for the derivative, we also need just one additional little control, because the derivatives, although it's not so significant, similar to the integral, it doesn't necessarily automatically get to 0 when your target 0. So let's go if. So we need something very similar to this little thing. So if the error is equal to 0, we want everything to be absolutely good. We don't want the derivative to mess us up. The derivative equal to 0. Alright, so excuse me, let me see how much time. Alright, so we have a few minutes, so I might start explaining right now why do we need a negative velocity, why do we need to add a negative velocity to the entire thing, and what does the derivative do. So essentially the derivative is a shock absorber or a stabilizer of the entire loop. It doesn't do anything, it doesn't contribute to anything, it subtracts, it makes the stuff slower. However, how does it absorb shock? For instance, if you are going too fast, the derivative would actually get big. So that essentially if we're going too fast, I subtract a lot. If I'm going slow, the derivative is small, so I'm subtracting very little. So essentially we're saying that let's not go too fast. If we go too fast, then I'm going to subtract a lot. If you don't go too fast or just stay there, I'm just not going to mess around with you. So the derivative essentially is saying that I stabilize the entire movement. You can't go too fast, and I just basically make the entire thing more smooth. And if your velocity changes if your position changes more suddenly, then I am going to limit you. And the derivative especially functions when you're doing your final oscillation and finally getting to the target. Oscillation essentially is very fast moving speed. You can regard the oscillation as moving very fast because you see that you are oscillating and your errors and stuff and they just oscillate everywhere, and the derivative really works very well to reduce your oscillation. So just remember, your derivative is a stabilizer in the loop, it's a shock absorber, and it helps with oscillation. However, if the derivative is too big, you're subtracting too much from the entire loop, your robot will start to go slow, and that's what we don't want. So when you're tuning the entire thing, make sure you don't give the derivative too big of a value so that it actually slows your thing down. And I guess I'm running out of time, so this is Martin of X Driver. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.